Hi guys, I hope Mum's feeling better today, and if she's not, I know you'll look after her. Okay, the next chapter is the Bazaar. Down in the gully, hidden from view by tall gum trees, banksias and tea trees, right against a huge rock, the bazaar was held. Dozens and dozens of birds, insects and animals, all dressed in their very best, chattering and squeaking, calling and singing, spreading their goods out on the rock under it and around it. No little boy or girl could see this wonder show unless they wandered far off the beaten track through the tall spear grass, deep, deep in the heart of the bush, away from all noises and people, and far down the valley where the maidenhair fern grows. Then you may be lucky enough to see a bush bazaar. But faces must be clean, hands washed and hair combed, as every animal and bird has plumed and preened himself and herself to look their very best. But hush! The Reverend Fluffy Ears is ready to make a speech and declare the bazaar open. He looks splendid. I'm sure he has been hours and hours brushing his ears. They look so silky. There he is, perched on the branch of a tree, looking down on all the bush folk as they sit and hop around, trying to find a patch of grass or rock to rest upon. There is very little room left for even a grasshopper to squeeze in, and some grumpy old ladies like Mrs. Owl and Miss Goanna glare at the younger ones as they try to find a spare seat. The colours are wonderful. Red and orange and purple berries are clustered in huge piles over the rock. Bright green leaves and the softest brown toadstools lie together. Birds' eggs of every colour imaginable are there in dozens to be sold, and right up against them are the little dead birds the butcher birds have brought. This is the produce store, and guarding it with glittering eyes is Mrs. Wallaby. Woe betide any creature who tries to steal even a berry. Farther away is a wonderful collection of birds' nests, all shapes and sizes, with a notice standing in the centre. Ready-made homes suitable for finches or magpies, mixed from the best mud and grasses, dirt cheap. Then there are small piles of grit, some red, others black and brown. The notice above these read, "Ants, take your choice, the very finest grit on the market, all half price." Under the ledge of the rock sat Miss Gertrude Spider with a very patient look on her face. But cunning, crafty eyes spoiled her appearance. Every hair on her legs was shining, and her body was polished like a doorknob. She had dozens and dozens of webs for sale, and knew very well that the fairies and goblins would be her best customers. Such folk dwell in the gullies and wait eagerly their chance of buying new webs for their clothes. Some webs were made of the finest thread, far finer than silk and silkworm spins, and were glittering with dewdrops. These were the very best and most expensive, only for fairy queens and princesses. Others were just as beautiful, though a little coarser, and had no dewdrops. But as Gertrude said, they will stand wear and tear. Every now and then she pulled a web, tugging it this way and that to show how strong it really was. Curly leaves on the ground were crammed full of flies, some dead and some alive. Others held mosquitoes and sandflies, and some even held small beetles. These were labelled according to their value. Dead flies, quite fresh, young and plump. Take some home for supper. Another was labelled, "Flies, all alive, legs and all, suitable for all occasions." The beetles had a special notice above them. "Beetles in season, colours not charged for, wings and nippers sold separately, beetle pie recipe given free." Gertrude Spider had dozens of customers round her stall, but the beetles who had come to see the bazaar stood aside in small groups, whispering in undertones and glancing nervously in her direction. Farther away in a dark, musty corner, hidden from view by a huge web, was her parlour, and she even had the boldness to suggest to small customers that they should walk into my parlour, just as if no one knew what that meant. The frogs were in charge of the swimming pool and had a grand slippery dip made from a rock covered with slithery moss. Their customers were mostly frog friends, but wild ducks also patronised the slippery dip. A swoop and a swish, and one after another they splashed into the pool amidst jeering and croaking from the onlookers. The bravest frogs did double bankers and back somersaults and all kinds of fancy flips and flops. Right across the centre of the pool, a branch of a tree rested on either side, and on it squatted a big fat mosquito. This was the greasy pole, and the fellow who was lucky enough to keep his balance while he crossed had the thought of that fine fat mosquito for a prize. The mosquito was tied to the branch by the finest spider web, so he was a prisoner, trembling from head to foot as he watched each new frog take his few steps, lose his balance, and go flopping into the pool. Shh, shh. There was a sudden silence, and all the bush folk turned to look at the Reverend Fluffy Ears. He waved his paw and flicked his ears, then spoke in a clear, dignified tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, spend all your money at this bazaar. As you know, it is in the aid of our poor friends who are homeless through the fire. Those who have no money can give their services free. Mrs. Possum has worked hard for months to make this bazaar a success, so I hope to see a friendly spirit among you all. Don't spoil things by scratching or kicking your neighbour, as I saw Mrs. Magpie and Mrs. Peewit doing, or biting and nipping a friend's tail when his back is turned. It's not kind, and above all, remember there's no stealing." A flutter in the tree and an angry voice from Mrs. Flying Fox prevented Reverend Fluffy Ears from speaking further. "A nice thing to suggest," she screamed. "Stealing indeed, as if anyone would do such a thing." A painful look came over the Reverend Fluffy Ears' face. He patted his nose and felt his collar. "It's an insult, that's what it is," roared Mrs. Flying Fox, and she made a lunge at the Reverend Fluffy Ears. "It's time I interfered," muttered Blinky to himself. Up to the present he had been sitting very quietly in a corner of the tree, too surprised and amazed at everything he saw to speak or even show himself. But he was not going to see another bear get the worst of a fight with all these creatures looking on. "Stop that," he commanded at the top of his voice. "Stop at once or I'll push you out of the tree." Mrs. Flying Fox darted round to see where the voice came from. "Oh, it's only you, is it? Another one of the koala family poking his big nose into other people's affairs." Blinky became very angry, and poor Fluffy Ears began to cry. "Someone stand below and catch her when I push her off," he shouted. And before Mrs. Flying Fox could believe her ears, she was given a kick that sent her flying out of the tree. But to everyone's horror, Blinky's bockers caught in a twig just as he gave the kick, and there he hung suspended in mid-air. "Help, help," he screamed, "I'm falling." A rip and a split, and Blinky parted from the best part of his knickerbockers. Down he fell, thud, right in the middle of a squealing and kicking crowd. It was not on the program to find a fat, plump bear squashing and kicking everyone within reach. "Grab her legs," Blinky shouted, but no one could get near enough as he seemed to be raising all the dust it was possible for anyone to do. "I'll settle this hubbub," said Percy Bull-Ant, blowing out his chest and advancing cautiously with his two front legs waving threateningly. Edging round the fighters, he managed at last to get a grip on Blinky's paw. Nip, 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 he bit with all his might. Blinky gave a spring in the air and came right down on top of Mrs. Possum. Mrs. Possum bit him savagely, and naughty Blinky at once kicked her, scratching and ripping her best hat to shreds. "Oh," wailed Mrs. Possum, "look at my hat, my very best hat." It wasn't his fault. It's all through Mrs. Flying Fox. Here was Angelina Wallaby of all people, and you can imagine how Blinky was pleased to see her. "Oh dear, Angelina, where did you come from?" "I happened to be watching you from the bush, and when I saw you fall, I thought it high time I came along to save you. Just look at your best bockers. What will your mother say?" I don't know," Blinky said nervously, feeling the back of his pants. "It is a very large hole, Angelina. It's so large that you've got no bockers at the back at all." "Serve you right. I hope you get a good smacking when you arrive home. I hope your mother wallops you." "You?" Blinky exclaimed, too surprised for further words. It was Mrs. Flying Fox speaking. She grinned spitefully at Blinky. Certainly she was bruised after her bump on the ground, but what a bump or two, and now there she stood, as cheeky as ever. "It's time to start the lucky dip," called out Blinky, and trotted over to his stall. Okay, we might leave it there, and we'll find out about the lucky dip tomorrow. I was just going to show you a picture, because I know Rose likes seeing the pictures. There's one of Blinky falling out of the tree and ripping his knickerbockers. See, there he's falling out of the tree after he kicked Mrs. Flying Fox, and he ripped a big hole in his pants. Okay, well, he hasn't got up to too much mischief, although he caused a bit of commotion. So we'll see what happens tomorrow. Have a good day today. Lots of love, Grandma. Here comes my thumb.